welcome to part 2 of day 2 of the Iconic Effect Live series. It's been so much fun. My gosh, my spirit just really needed this time, these great conversations. And I'm just so delighted to be here with literally one of my absolute favorite people in the entire world, Marie. Just so honored by our friendship, honored by our relationship, and honored by your work. So thank you for being here, darling.
Oh, the feeling is mutual.
Thank you. So for anybody who is just joining us for the first time, for that over the course of the series, this is a 4-day series. I've been having conversations with amazing folks that I know, and one or two that I haven't had much contact with. Yesterday I spoke with Asha Frost, who I'd never actually had a one-on-one conversation with, and it was divine. But I'm having conversations with folks who I feel do a beautiful job of embodying these iconic identities that I've been talking about for some time. I started this body of work. I've been in exploration of the imposter complex for 12, I can't even tell you how many years now. And so I didn't really want to focus all the conversations in and around, the imposter complex and how hard that can be. I always wanted to have there be a bit more of an aspirational pull to it. So I was using the language of, stepping into your starring role, what that might be. And we'll get into this a little bit, but Marie was one of the people who was like, I don't know that that's super resonant for me. And that, Marie is a maven, and we're going to get into that as well. But when Marie speaks, people listen, me included. So I really dug into what the language I felt would be a little more appropriate. And this is where I came up with the iconic language. So thank you for that, Marie.
Wow.
And
Glad that worked out.
yeah, right. And the idea being, what I love about the word iconic is that you can't spell iconic without IC, imposter complex twice, meaning you get it this for the front end of your journey, and all the way along in your journey, you can experience the imposter complex. So if you're looking for a little more context around what I mean when I'm talking about iconic, check out day 1. I did the first 10 minutes, first maybe 15 minutes of my interview with Greg. I really get into the meat of this, but you're here today to hear from Marie, who is the paragon of Maven, as far as I'm concerned. But I want to just sort of lay the groundwork a little bit for why we're doing this. This is really, for me, the self-development space is a $42 billion industry and counting. And that's a lot of money invested in making people feel pretty crappy about themselves. So my want is for you to tap into those places that maybe you've been apologetic for, or you've been told you can't be with, the perfectionism, the comparison. Stop comparing. Just stop comparing your insides with everybody else's outsides. I don't think that that's very helpful. So I want to look at a different way of being. So I've been tying these behavioral traits that tend to show up with the imposter complex and link them into these iconic identities and really pull out those beautiful values. So just a couple of house rules, especially if you're new joining us. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We have Leslie on my team holding up the sides of our process. Thank you for being here, Leslie. Please, 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 if you have any questions for us, there's going to be a generous question and answer period at the end of our conversation. That's why we designed these as live rather than straight up podcast. We want kind of an inside the imposter studio. No, inside the studio vibe.
Love it.
So whatever your questions are, pop them in the chat. We'll circle back around to them when we open up for that session. Until then, try to staff audio if you are able to do so. And you have an option of closed captioning if that is something that you would like. And I really just hope in these conversations, in today's conversation with Marie, that you recognize the Maven that you hold within. Maybe if you want to bring that out a bit more, maybe you'll be inspired to do so. And then also, as you listen to the other interviews, see which other identities also resonate for you that you can pull pull out of yourself. Super quickly, I am a leadership coach, a TEDx women's speaker, been doing this work since 2007, Lord love a duck. And, I really want to, allow you all to recognize that I'm a reluctant expert in the imposter complex, did not go looking for this nonsense. It came looking for me. I work and live in the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee people. And I always want to acknowledge the lens from which I approach this imposter complex work as a woman, a white woman of neurotypical middle-class means living in North America. That's not everybody else's experience. So part of the reason I've been having this series and my Ready Enough series was for you to be able to connect with other folks that may be a more appropriate teacher for you and your lived experience. So we've had a conversation with Asha Frost, who was the iconic identity of the healer. Greg Potter was the host. We spoke with Mara Glatzel this morning, who is the visionary. Marie is the maven. Tomorrow will be Steph Cowling-Rich, who will be our sage, and Trisha Bolender, who is our CEO. So it's a robust series. And on Thursday, I'm going to be doing a solo show where you can just come and ask me any questions about imposter complex, about these iconic identities, about what is available for you through this work. And if you haven't already taken the quiz, Leslie, please pop it in the chat, tanyageisler.com/quiz, to find out what iconic identity is most up for you right now, the one that might be the most, that have the most value for you. But without further ado, I would love to invite my pal, my beloved Marie Poulin, onto the metaphorical stage here. Marie is a Notion Mastery host, the Notion Mastery host, Okie Dokie co-founder, permaculture maven. Like, I just feel like I don't feel like we talk about that enough. And honestly, when Marie talks, people listen. I will tell you, Marie and I have been working on and off together since about 2014. Do you know that?
Yeah, wow.
And when I say Marie talks, people listen. Anytime Marie recommends my work and somebody comes through the Marie door, I mean, it is always magic. Marie just does this exquisite job of connecting people to people, and ideas to people, and people to ideas, and ideas to ideas, and just an absolute true connector. And that for me is the hallmark of the Maven identity, is that of connector. And you actually walked in through the door of work that I did with Lauren Bacon on comparison, right? It was through Beyond Compare.
Yep.
Yeah. Back in 2014, my Lord.
Yep.
So that was just a really interesting exploration with you. So let's just dive on into what. So first of all, welcome, Marie.
Thank you. Thank
Your
you.
fabulous new hair.
Thank you.
I love it. It just feels so light on you.
Thank you.
What does this Maven business mean to you?
Well, you might get a kick out of this, Tanya, but of course, the first thing I did was like, okay, well, what does Maven mean? And I went to Google because I wanted to know, like, how does the dictionary define Maven, right? It's someone who's experienced, someone who's knowledgeable. And as I was reading a little further, it said, see also freak. And so I clicked on that and went down a little rabbit hole there. And it was like an ardent enthusiast, or someone who's obsessed with something. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. Like, that makes sense to me, given the ADHD hyper-focus too, that idea of accumulating knowledge and seeing those connections. So I just thought you might get a kick out of that. That, of course, the first thing I had to do was be like, well, how does the dictionary define this first? What are all the connections around this? And I think I've had kind of a funny path when I think about expertise. Like, I think to myself, well, what am I the expert in? Because I've done so many different things in my career, right? And I went to design school. I've studied design thinking, permaculture. We've done stuff with online courses. We're doing stuff with Notion right now and software. So there's all these little pockets of experience. But of course, as a connector, I think I'm always just pulling what I'm learning into this big, portfolio toolkit of things that I'm learning. And I'm always able to kind of bring those into the next chapter of whatever I'm doing. So when you first said, I see you as the Maven, I'm like, what? Me, an expert expert, but I have so many different interests and there's so many different things going on. And it's been interesting, this idea of, well, am I really an expert? And one of the core memories I think I have when I first started working, and I worked at a studio for a few months, the boss said to me, your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. You're pretty good at a lot of things, but you're not good at any one thing. And it was like this, it was a big blow at the time, right? There was a kernel of truth to it, but it was definitely a pretty harsh sort of reality check. And I thought, oh, well, what am I really good at? Like, what does it mean to be pretty good at a lot of things, but not good at any one thing? That sort of jack of all trades, master of none. And so that, I think, it was like an early wound in my career. And I thought, ooh, like, where do I take this then? What does it mean if I'm not going to be the best designer? Who am I? What does that mean for me? And I think that maybe started that imposter complex of, oh, well, who am I to dare to do something in design when, this boss here has told me you're not very good at that. And I think I started moving through the world in a different way, and I had less confidence as I was, jumping off on my own and running my own business. And so that was probably the beginning of like, oh, I think I need some support with this. Like I need a coach around this, because that was holding me back in a lot of different ways. Happy to like dig into any of that, but yeah, that core memory was like this is.
I wonder what the intention behind that was. Like, how does somebody take that and do anything with that kind of feedback? And I suspect you're also of a pretty impressionable age too.
Yeah. Well, and I was working as a strategist at the time. And I think in an interesting way, like what makes a strategist good is the ability to do research, to pull ideas, to filter, to sift through things. And I was good at that, but I think I wanted to do more design, but he was sort of like, well, you're not good enough at this thing over here. Like, let's just have you do this hodgepodge of things over here. So, in a weird way, that interest in so many different things has actually really served me in my career, especially as a self-employed person. I think naturally you wear many hats. It's like you got to do a little bit of accounting and marketing and design and copywriting. There's all these different skills, which I think I've been able to get to the point of almost like enough mastery. Like it's actually quite helpful to be pretty good at a lot of things and to pick up things really quickly and to see those connections. So it served me in the way that I like to show up and to be an explorer and to see different interests and to kind of see how things connect. So I think I saw it as a weakness, but I actually now see it as a strength. But it took me a long time to maybe appreciate that about myself.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll just say that for myself, one of the, so I went very, as we call it in coaching, very level one, where I was just thinking about my own experience. And I was thinking, I wonder how often you hear that voice, that person's voice, because I definitely have that person in my life, that voice that continues to be this refrain. And no matter how much I've reframed it, it can still be this little bit of a jab.
Yeah.
The quote unquote, the good news of the imposter complex, of course, is that, we only experience it in the realms that really matter to us. And as somebody who is so curious as you are, and who really values proficiency and excellence, these are always opportunities to just get better and better and better.
Yeah.
She became my best friend, but one of the first conversations I had with my high school best friend was, and we're still very close. She said, I didn't like you for the longest time because, me, I came in second year in high school, not knowing anybody. And I just decided I'd been to a very, very cliquey school. I'm getting somewhere, I promise. And so when I came in, I had no history, like nobody knew me. I just got to come in and clean slate, and I didn't really want to invest in any one friend group. I just wanted to flit around, as it were. And my now friend, I'm gonna call her Tristana. She will probably not watch this, and that's okay if she does. I remember her saying, I didn't like you at first because I was really jealous of the fact that you were able to flit about in the way that you were. And a little like you were saying, I didn't have like deep roots anywhere, but I loved that, being able to survey. And that was really, I'm still, in a lot of ways, I really can see my Maven quality in that regard, but it's not an identity that I necessarily identify with. I'm much more of the host. I'm much more, I've got a lot of CEO, but the Maven is something that I'm starting to come back to. In fact, this whole interview series is a nod to my desire to pull more Maven back into my being, have these delicious sips of conversation, and connecting people and ideas. And I love seeing new faces here. And I love that people are connecting with the fabulous folks that I'm bringing together. I will say for you, because it's not about me and my Tristaniness, but one of the things that I know when we first started working together was we identified pretty early that it wasn't, this is very big. You didn't have a fear of success as much as there was, fear of failure as much as I felt that you had a fear of success. And through that, that's how we landed the plane on how much connection mattered to you, because for you to become the kind of success, and I want wild success on your behalf all day, every day. But I think that there was a belief that for you to step into that, you would need to disconnect from the folks that had brought you to this point, because everywhere you go, you gather people, and people are really excited about what you're doing, and they're not always excited about what's next for you. Yeah. So it's like there's a way in which of like recognizing that people are like, okay, just like stay here, like just stay here, and then like let me get caught up and not interested in you moving on to the next. And I know that our earliest work was in helping you access that you can be connected at every single possible level, that it's not a title, it's just how you move in the world. Does that still land for you?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think when you work online too, and you're always figuring out these different formats of delivering your work, right? That was a big conversation around what does it mean to lead group programs? Like, how do you still feel in connection with people when the format of your offers is evolving or scaling or growing? What does that mean? So yeah, I love that. Like even with my students, I know I've got some students here listening too, but like I love being in conversation with those folks in a group environment as well. Like the fact that I get to actually connect with people one-on-one in these little ways throughout a scalable experience is like, it has to be baked in to the offer. Yeah.
Yeah. And now what I really perceive about your work is that it's you have brought in so much of your exploratory nature that people, they're part of your community. They know that you're going to be checking out the next and the next and the next, and it's part of your design, and you're not going to abandon anybody. It's like, come on, like, let's go explore this together. Nobody is being left behind in this exploration. And that's that's why I say when you talk, people listen, because it's like, Marie's going to help figure this out.
I think the self-exploration too is what that's what I find most interesting too. And so I think sometimes people, they want the answer from the expert, but I know that we're the experts on ourselves, right? Or we know what we need, or it's our job to discover what we need. And so I want to ask the questions to get people to get a little more curious about their own needs and not just be looking for what are the experts showing me and like the getting things done. And, you're kind of aligning yourself with all these frameworks and to strip it down and say, hold on, like, is this actually aligned with what you need? Like, what questions could we ask to get us to be a little more intuitive about our own needs? And so my hope is, I guess, to develop more curiosity with anyone that I work with around what they need.
Will you walk us through a little bit of a time frames of like what you've been deeply interested in exploring? Because I feel like I get these slivers and these snapshots, but it's always like every time I get a Marco Polo from you, which is how Marie and I communicate, I'm like, oh,
what's she up to now?
Here we go. What's new? So walk me through some of it. So you were doing the design first. Just walk us through back then to today.
Yeah, there was, 4 years of design school. And even during design school, there was I'm going to design and make all of my clothing. And so I would like sew my own clothes. And I was like, I want at least 50% of my wardrobe to be my own clothes. Like, that's not something I've done in many, many years and people don't know about, but there's always these little snippets of things, right? Like craft and what does it mean to create? And any part of design, architecture, whatever is very interesting to me. And the creative process is very interesting to me. Any, creative shows like those runway shows where you're having these crazy time constraints and you're having to pull together something really creative, really fast. Like I find observation of the creative process is so fascinating to me. So that's one little nugget was, design school. But after design school, I saw how much web design and interactivity was taking off, and even animations. And so I went, deep dive into web design and interactivity. Then as you start working with more people in web design, you start seeing the kinds of people that need their websites done. Well, they need the payment gateways pulled together. They need sales pay. Okay, let's learn about marketing. And so it just sort of felt like there was always these new chapters to learn. And that if you couldn't really stagnate, I think, when you're running an online business, there's always just something new is happening, and technology changes so fast, which I think for my brain, it was just, ping, dopamine, let's go. Like, what's next? This is very exciting. And so for a while we got into online courses because that was the majority of people that had budgets to spend on web design were people that had scalable offers in some form. They had coaching programs, they had ebooks and things like that. So, okay, let's learn about what does it mean to make and sell ebooks? What are the payment gateways that we can use to do that? What makes a really good sales page? Well, better learn about copywriting. Copywriting is the new skill. So there's just been so many little chapters. And so I did a copywriting course with Joanna Weeb. That was probably the best $2,000, some of the best $2,000 I ever spent, because those skills have, for years and years, you will continue to use copywriting skills anytime you are communicating about your work in the written form or through email and that sort of thing. There was the design thinking certification that I did, learning about Notion and productivity. Like it's all kind of related, but they just keep building on one another. And so I think systems design and the design of systems has what's been kind of captivating for me, because I think there's like the invisible structures that make everything happen, right? And so the more that you learn about these invisible structures, I'm like, okay, there is a design to this, whether you can see it or not. And I think I just became really, really fascinated by that. So those are just some of the many chapters that have been along the way.
And then permaculture?
Permaculture, yeah, did a permaculture certification, which is mostly out in the garden. You're learning about nature, in nature, but I could not help but see how these concepts were totally translatable in business, right? How much energy are you putting into a thing versus what you're getting out? I'm like, well, where are the places in my business that we're spending like 80% of our time and effort and stress and attention, but you're not getting very much out. So the concepts were just, to me, one and one. I'm like, I love this as a metaphor. It's quite practical, but there's also just this language that is totally translatable into business as well. So I think I got extra excited about it because I'm like, ooh, this is totally related to this thing over here.
I remember that. I remember you sharing that so much of the process. And the one that really stuck out for me was the idea, and I'm sure there's a term for it that of course I don't know what it is, but you will, so that's good, about just letting things grow and letting them see what they want to natively do, as opposed to forcing. It's like, just like, let things sit. What are the conditions that it organically desires, rather than forcing our hand, which I just thought was so romantic and so beautiful.
This idea of, what every plant has its own ideal conditions to thrive. And I just thought, like, we're the same way. Humans are exactly the same way. The amount of light, water, whatever, it's a little different for all of us. The amount of connection that we need, what drives us, when are we our happiest? When are we showing up our fullest? Those conditions are going to be completely different from person to person. And so I think I became really, excited about this idea of like, what are my best conditions to thrive? What are the offers that we have in our business where we can show up in our best way and we're not feeling totally run over by a truck? Like, what gets us excited to get out of bed in the morning? And where can you discern those shoulds, right? And this is where that comparison thing comes out. You have these models of possibility and you're like, well, I like these pieces, but I don't really like this about that. And you're trying to find out where is your place in the world when you maybe have limited examples of what's possible.
So this makes me think then about how Notion and your involvement with Notion came about. I make up that it was a way for you to organize your thoughts, your visions, how you were seeing. So tell us a little bit about that love story with you and your
Yeah.
discovery of Notion and what you did with that.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's not familiar with Notion, you could say it's a productivity platform of sorts, right? It's almost to me more like an emotional companion or a personal development companion. Um, it's a place where we can do project management. I can do journaling. I can do research, right? It's my second brain. It's almost every part of my life is in Notion in some form or another. It's the way that I organize my thoughts, my creativity, my projects. It's all in there. And it's so malleable. You have to give it the structure that you want. It's not opinionated like other tools. And so it was kind of this blank canvas. How do you want to set this up? How do you want information to look? And the idea that, for example, my husband and I can use the same tool, but it can look completely different when you open it. Because to me, as a more visual person, I want to see my goals with a really pretty cover image and, progress bars and things like that. Like, I love the visual aspect of it, that it can look any way that I want it to look. So I was just sort of delighted by this. Oh, I can be productive, but I can also be inspired. I can have a quick place to jot my notes down and it not feel too messy, and it can give it structure. And so it just evolved over time. I got so excited by having, I think, a little bit more control and creativity over how I was approaching my projects. It wasn't so like everything in a to-do list and really boring. Like, I knew I needed a little bit more whimsy and an inspiring environment to start the day. And to do it my way. And so I just started sharing what I was doing with that. I did a little experiment where I said, let's make a YouTube video every week for 12 weeks. And that was definitely way out of my comfort zone. Like, the idea of definitely publishing on YouTube was like, oh man, YouTube turned me inside out, the thought of it. But it's the best way to screen share, to demonstrate, to communicate your ideas in a visual way. And so that exploded pretty quickly. And so just seeing the momentum that came from that, I was like, well, I guess I got to learn more about this YouTube thing, because it's just people were really delighted. They were curious. They were like, how did you figure out how to do that? How did the Notion team, I did a presentation for their team when they were like 50 people. I think they're many hundreds now. But I just did a demonstration of my space and showed how I was using it. And, the team themselves were blown away. They were like, how is this customer, using our product in ways that even internally we didn't even know were possible. And that was just my own curiosity, right? I was just playing with it. I was wanting to push the boundaries of what was possible. What else could it do? Let's try this. Could I journal? Could I do this? And it just became kind of a playground for me. And I think it just opened up a lot of doors, and people were like, oh, wow, there's something more to this tool than just being like a productivity system.
Well, I think that really speaks into, when you were saying, what am I an expert in? I think that this sense, when I first opened Notion, that idea, so you have to give it the structure. You have to give it the structure. That is so intimidating to so many of us. So, absolutely, for me, I need something to respond to, because if I'm given a wide open question or a wide open space, I get like overwhelmed and an emotional agoraphobia kind of experience. Like, I need sides to be held up. So I think that as I watched your teachings really explode, you are the name, because I think that you really, watching the way your brain works is such a treat. And also, to what you're saying before, like, this works, this doesn't work, this works, this doesn't work. Like, I get to play with that. And I love also your interest and excitement around those little experimentations. I remember was it 100 days of showing up in video? I forgot what he's just.
Yep. Yeah. 100-day vlogging.
Mm-hmm. You're doing something like that right now with TikTok. Is that right? Are you?
Yeah. At least one TikTok every day.
I love this. I love that you just do these. Have you ever done, I'm sure, well, tell me about an experimentation that you did for a period of time that you were like, let me just see how I respond to this. And by the way, what I love about you doing this, I think it's certainly of service to other folks, but I think it's you really trying to understand how you move, which I think
Yes.
is what's so exciting. And that's what's always so magnetic about it. It's not a performance you're doing for other people. It's really like, I want to see what I can collate for myself and curate for myself. And if it's of service, fantastic,
Yeah.
which I think is just brilliant. So what are some of those experiments that you've done for a period of time? You're like, hard pass, we get it gone.
Ooh. Oh, that's so tough. Like, for example, I did acting classes for a year as one of the many ways to help me get over my stage fright. And I feel like probably shaved years off my life doing that. It was like the most challenging thing, one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, but learned so much. You learn so much about yourself, your emotional range just like completely opens up. When I moved to the coast, they don't have, lessons out here like they did in Vancouver. But I sort of felt like, okay, like did that, checked it off my list, like we're good. I don't know that I need to keep doing that, but it was an absolutely amazing experience. Things like Tough Mudder, like let's do this. Great, checked it off the list. Glad I did it, but like I don't need to keep doing that. So I'm always willing to try something once for sure and do things that scare me. Like that's no problem.
Days like I'll do things for maybe 21, but more likely 10, and then I'm like, I never have to
I'm good.
for like 100 days. That's amazing. You talked about conditions of thriving, and I know that that's organically things that you talk about that organically with folks, but how
Yeah.
do you counsel folks if somebody's like, oh, I don't know my conditions for thriving are? How do you
Mm.
direct folks as you've been in such observation of your own thriving?
Yeah, I think I talk a lot about journaling being just a total game-changing habit, weekly reviews and journaling. So everything starts with observation. What do you notice about yourself? Where is there friction? Right? What are the most frustrating parts of what kind of happens day to day? And starting with the things that happen the most often. So it's usually at the daily level, right? Like something simple for me, I don't do calls before 10 a.m. I didn't even know that I had the control to do that in the early years
Yeah.
of my business, right? If the client's like, oh, well, how would, 7 a.m. work? I'm like, sure. And I would be so stressful to wake up in the morning when I know I'm not at my best. I'm not firing on all cylinders at 7 in the morning. So little things like that, just noticing, like, when do you have most energy, right? Can you do a bit of a log? Can you take note of where you have the most energy? And then how can we use tools to at least help us make some of those insights? So Rescue Time is one of those tools. It's a free tool. I tell people to install it a couple weeks. It basically automatically just tracks all the different apps that you're using in a day. Like how much time are you spending in email versus Photoshop versus Zoom? And you can categorize the different apps. Like Zoom is a high productivity tool. Email is a low productivity. Like you can kind of rate it on a scale and it'll show you in a day, when are you kind of doing your most creative work, when are you tending to do your admin work. And if you're tracking and you're noticing and you're just reflecting without judgment, you can start to look at some of those patterns and say, oh, if I have a call in the morning, I usually get really hyper afterwards. I get really excited after hopping on a call with someone, but I actually can't really do highly focused writing work afterwards. So just these funny little patterns that you can start to notice to say, when would it make sense for me to have a deep work day? Do I need to not schedule any call? Do I need one day a week where I do my creative work? Or do I want to do it every morning for an hour in the morning? And just encouraging people to just get a little curious for a period of time and not rush to kind of fixing or, time blocking and making a schedule. It's like, give yourself some grace and just notice what's been coming up for you and maybe where you're feeling a little bit of that friction. I'm all about designing for optimizing energy levels. I didn't know that this was related to dopamine management and ADHD. I didn't know till a year and a half ago that I had ADHD. It's like, oh, that would explain why I've been so careful about doing that, but maybe didn't know why I was doing that. So the more that I have learned about that, I'm like, oh, working out in the morning is probably going to help me, even though I had resistance to it for years. But now that's something I've been able to integrate, and it's taken a really long time. But it's that observation and reflection process that I think you can't really skip. And so if it's journaling, even if it doesn't have to be complicated, it can be some scribbles, on a sheet of paper on your desk, but just giving yourself some space to notice things a little more deeply.
I love that. So you said observation, and then what was the next thing? Because I went straight to you go to evaluation. So what's between after observation is then what?
Yeah, I guess I didn't, formally give it a phrase or whatever, but it would be, how do we design for what's next then, right? So let's analyze. What did we notice? What are the
Mhm.
patterns? What's consistent? What's consistently difficult? And there is an element of experimentation, right? So there's a design that you put into place. So for me, it was, okay, I'm going to try doing theming my days, and every Wednesday is going to be my deep work day, and it's going to look like this. And you make a hypothesis about what you think it's going to look like, and then you try it out for a couple of weeks. You see, like, okay, is this working? What's not working? So every week, I'm just asking myself, what is not working this week? What felt really good? How do I get more of what feels good, and how can I make some different decisions about what's not feeling good? So it's just constantly making these, fine tuning adjustments based
Celebrating.
on, yeah,
Yeah, I love that.
recalibrating.
Because honestly, I think that we can spend a lot of time in observation, and then I think we can spend a fair bit of time in the analysis of that. And I don't know that we necessarily design, I'll say I perhaps don't always design for what's next in that way, or I'm kind of quick to move on to the next thing. So that's just really helpful to
And I think folks, they want to get it right. So there's that, like, oh, I did the analysis and now this should be perfect. But I'm like, no, this is a constant experimentation. And even, like, we know markets change, industry changes, phases of life, people get sick, things happen. And so what works for you for this season is absolutely going to change next season. So I think I'm never too attached to how things look right now. I'm always like, okay, this is working for right now. And when it's not working, we'll shift gears and we'll try something different. I'm very comfortable, I think, in process and experimentation. I'm much more interested in process than I am about that perfect little outcome that we're looking for. It is the journey to me that is more intriguing.
I also really appreciate about you that there's a framework that Lauren and I talked about many years ago, where if you look at comparison as this matrix, this grid, we think about comparison when we chastise ourselves for being in comparison. Usually we're talking about hero worship, where we are putting somebody else on a pedestal, or like only perceiving their light and denying our own, or disdain, where we are only perceiving somebody's shadow and ignoring our own. I see you living in the sort of the higher level places of evaluation, where you can look at something through the lens of conscious critique and see yourself and see other folks with sort of this sense of equanimity, and also celebration. I think part of because you're such an amplifier of other teachers, I think that I put that in the category of celebration, where you aren't where you're perceiving somebody else's light and also your own, and I think that's just so exquisite to witness, because again, you're perpetually the student who's always experimenting and exploring and again connecting people, and not trying to pedestalize them, but saying, like, this is who I've been learning from in this functional area, because I wanted to do deep dive and my experimentation was only going to take me this far. So I wanted to learn from this person. And then again, like going through that experience of watching you take what you needed and releasing the rest, which is just, again, just beautiful, beautiful to watch. And I think plays into the reason you have such deep roots and people hold your opinions and perspectives in such high regard. No projections there.
Yeah,
Nope.
I think, touching upon that, I think it took a long time for me to feel like an expert, because I am a perpetual student and I'm always experimenting. So because I never quite feel like I've arrived at the final framework, it's like, can I teach people something while I'm still learning and experimenting about this? And so, yes, I can. And it wasn't until being more transparent about that, saying, hey, this is what is working for me currently, but I'm also experimenting and discovering these other things over here. I think people that I'm working with appreciate that honesty there, that I'm referencing my sources. I'm saying, I like this part of this framework I've learned over here. I like this thing over here, but I'm also not sure about this thing over here. And just being honest about my own curiosity and kind of what I'm bumping up against. I think there's educational value in that itself, being in process. And so it took me a while, I think, to appreciate that my teaching style is just going to be a little bit different, and how I think of expertise is going to be maybe different than other teachers. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
And again, I feel like that's what you invite others to, to like take what's yours, and your Notion board's going to look entirely different from mine. Your garden's going to look entirely different from mine. Like
And it should. Yeah.
it definitely should, because you're not going to have the
Yeah.
same shade. You're not going to have the same soil conditions. You're going to have just very different conditions for your own kind of success. So where are you at with Notion now? What's your work these days?
Yeah, so Notion Mastery is where, most of our time, energy, and attention is going at the moment. And we're thinking about what are the concepts that we're teaching through Notion Mastery, because we do a lot of teaching that's implicit, that's not necessarily about the software, that is that self-reflective piece, alignment piece. Like, why are we designing Notion in this way? And so we're just thinking about what are the enduring ideas that will remain regardless of what software we're working with and that we're teaching people. So we're still teaching Notion Mastery, and we love the software and we love playing in that space. And we're also thinking about, what's next after Notion? Who knows what's going to happen with AI, right? Things are changing very, very fast. Software tools do just change constantly, and that's outside of our control too. As the company grows bigger and bigger, they're going to make choices that we don't have any control over, and so they could make a pivot that completely changes our current business and how we teach and stuff like that. So we're thinking about, okay, what are the concepts and things that we want to teach, and what's next? So I think we're still in that discovery phase now, and looking at that, and whether it's change management, systems design, the permaculture of business, there are other concepts that I think we're testing the waters with a little bit in our current teaching to see like what's resonating with people, and then how can we bring those into standalone workshops that regardless of what software you're using, these ideas are going to be valuable.
Who's the we that you keep referring to?
Oh, yes, my husband, Ben. Yes, we've been running our company together, I guess since 2014 when you and I started working together. And we've had different iterations of what that looked like, where we were kind of working separately under the same umbrella, working in the same business together. So it's been really interesting to go through all of these different evolutions, but we're currently both teaching the course together. It's been really fun. This is kind of like the first iteration where we're fully in the same business, working on the same concepts, same projects together. And it's been really fun.
The fun growth edge for him too, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so good. How are you using AI, you yourself, Marie? Like, have you been playing with it, exploring?
Yeah, playing with it. It's still pretty new. Like I posted a TikTok the other day of like writing poems with Notion AI, and it was just like, write a poem about designing your schedule based on your energy levels. And like, throughout this amazing poem, like better than I could have written. I was like, okay, that's creepy. So I'm using it as like a creative augmentation tool. So help me outline a workshop that covers these 3 concepts, blah, blah, blah. Just like getting ideas to jump off of and to bounce off of. You can highlight sentences and kind of elaborate on this, make it longer, make it shorter, simplify this, turn these into action items. And I think we're still just kind of scratching the surface there. So Ben's definitely really curious and keen on that too, like from a technology standpoint, like what is this going to mean? Can you ask it to build Notion databases based on your text and things like that? So it's pretty wild. I don't even know where it's going to go, but yeah,
that's the same face I have too.
like nervous, like the future is here, but this is a terrifying future. Yeah.
Are we ready? Are we ready? Folks, we are going to be opening up to questions very, very soon. I've got a couple more from Marie, but please, please, please pop them into the chat. We've got 15 more minutes of Marie's very precious time. So if you have been dying to ask her a question, again, Marie's such a generous, and I mean, really, you are so generous with your time. And, I see you answering questions on Twitter and TikTok, like all the time. And something I'm a little up your nose about too. Like, so now's a really good time to ask Marie any questions about being a Maven, maybe even about comparison, certainly about Notion, whatever is coming up for you. I am curious about your upcoming trip to Japan.
Yes.
What's
still
the
in
plan?
research mode. Yeah, but I think we're probably going to pick maybe 3 or 4 main cities to stay at for a little extended periods of time and use those as jumping off points. But yeah, food, culture, art, outdoors. Like just, I want to explore and just immerse ourselves and experience the local culture.
A month, a month.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely exquisite that's going to be.
Absolutely.
So currently, how do folks work with you, or what's your favorite way to be working with folks? Like, what are you inviting
Mm.
people into your work these days?
Yeah, like in the beginning of doing the Notion stuff, I was doing a lot of consulting as well as the course, and it was too much one-on-one. And so most of my energy at the time is done through teaching Notion Mastery group programs. So it's like delivering office hours, writing curriculum, doing customer support, answering questions and things like that. I still do love consulting and coaching, but I know I have to be very measured and very careful about how I do that. I do struggle with boundaries because, like, as you know, we love to be generous, and it's really easy sometimes, I think, when you really care about how people are doing, to over index and to, yeah, burn myself out if I'm not careful. So I do have to be very measured about how many sort of one-on-one people I can take on. I actually prefer for any one-on-one work that I do to be pro bono. Like, I'd almost rather just like buy the course and work with me, or I'm working with a nonprofit organization doing something really interesting with them behind the scenes. So at the moment, that's the only way to work with me.
Well,
Yeah.
I've really appreciated. So yesterday I spoke with Asha Frost about boundaries, and she shared. So she wrote the book "You're the Medicine," and she talks about bear as the archetype for excellent boundaries, and how hibernation was sort of the response to being this overextended, over delivering kind of being that everybody needed from. And I will say, as somebody who's again watched your work up close and personal, we get to do intensives from time to time that I just always look forward to those for weeks in advance, and we are overdue. Yeah, almost overdue. But watching you navigate your boundaries and create more spaces and chunks of time, and also kind of like apportioning that as a responsibility to other folks on your team to make sure that you are protecting your own boundaries as well, has been really that's been really great to see, because you are so deeply generous. Yeah,
the team helps with that big time.
I get that, and I know that you've got a rock solid team in place right now. So folks, what are your questions for Marie? Please pop them in the chat, and Leslie, if anybody's been DMing you, please go ahead and share those. So one question that came in as text: how have you overcome comparison? Have you overcome comparison?
I do feel, I'm sure a lot of that was, some of our initial work together, but I think it takes a really long time to appreciate the weird ways that you are unique, and there is just nobody else like you, and there's just room in the market for so many different people. And I think about how many books I have read in the same, like, how many branding books have I read, or productivity books have I read, and I've gotten something from all of those different people. So we need different voices, we need different types of people. And yeah, like, there isn't anyone like me, but there's lots of other amazing Notion creators doing things in a different way and having a different flavor and a vibe. And there's going to be people that align with that, and that's great. So I just have a very different approach these days, and just wanting to celebrate other creators and amplify other creators, because I don't see their success as taking anything away from me. I don't know. I feel very chill. Like, I'm like excited for everybody. I'm like, yeah, let's do this.
That's the celebration. That's the celebration. And on celebration, people ask me about this all the time, and I always try to remember to attribute it to the end of year celebration. We do that. So I saw Marie and Ben had this jar, I guess, where you have put pieces of paper of the highlights of the year, and then on New Year's Eve you would pull them out. And I think last time we talked about this, because it was almost New Year's Eve, and I was saying we were excited about that because my whole family does it. We do it together. It's a lovely tradition, and I think you're saying that you hadn't been doing that because you were doing that in Notion, but you're still doing some variation of that. But that celebration piece. It's so bloody key. I don't have a single conversation that doesn't come up. Right?
Yes. And that's part of like my weekly review, my daily review is like, what what was a win or highlight. And, you know, on a nerdy level too, like Ben and I both do our journals, like our journals are private in Notion, but we have a connected database of highlights together. So we can actually, in our personal journals, add a little highlight. It goes to a shared database, and that's the one that we access at the end of the year. So there'll be a combination of Ben's wins, my wins, and even just memories together. And it's just kind of a fun little way to track that. And I do think that celebration, in a way, it came from my work with you. Like, you were always at, like, how are you going to celebrate this? Like, what is this milestone? And so it's kind of funny that's come full circle in that way. But I think I have a deeper appreciation of the importance of celebration from our work together. And so even that authority thesis, right? That was something that, you know, years ago, you, as part of your work, you encourage people to put together their authority. Where is the evidence that shows you are the expert? You know, you are who you say you are. And so getting in the habit of gathering those, like, we have a love notes database, we track all of that stuff. We read it together as a team every week. What are the love notes that came in this week? What are the like lovely things someone said on Twitter about anyone on our team, and read those together. So it's almost like making celebration a habit, right? It's just such a good habit to get into.
I could not love that more. And that authority thesis piece and the celebration are in tandem, because the reason folks resist building that proof, that evidence bank, the data points that underscore how fabulous you really are, how much you already know, has everything to do with not codifying and taking time to integrate with celebration. That's the reason. You know, it's always the same thing. So no matter what group I go in and speak with, whether it's engineers or CEOs or musicians or MPs, this part is always a bit of an eyeball roll of, like, you know, oh God, I got to track this. Yeah, you got to track this. You've got to track it. Otherwise you won't. The ego wants to want more than it wants to get. And then it makes it really hard for us to build upon the last and the last. Couple of questions in my DMs. One is, what are you currently learning about? What are you currently learning about?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a learnophile. So there's always like at least 2 or 3 4 courses on the go. What I'm actually learning about is an ADHD certification, like learning about the neurology of ADHD, because I do want to, in my own teachings, I'm only an expert in my own brain. I know ADHD looks very, very different, spectrum disorder. And there's a huge number of my students that have ADHD. So I want to be just a little bit more informed, not just for my own design, but for other people. When we're talking about designing for your own needs, what does that look like for different people? So that's very interesting to me. I'm also doing an Unschools educator certification too, very related to design thinking, with Leila Ajaralu. She's got like a permaculture farm in Portugal. Very interesting person. So doing a certification there too. Oh, and then I have a 2-week plant-based boot camp in Vancouver in June. So going to culinary school for 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness. And I don't think that's the first time you've done that. Don't I remember you talking about showing your mise en place? And I was like, oh, I love that you know what mise en place is, because that's like, cooking is my world.
Yeah. There's a whole book around that. I think it's called Work Clean. And he talks about working like a chef. It's a really, really great book. But I actually signed up for this boot camp pre-COVID, and then COVID hit and I couldn't do it. So it's been on my mind for a couple of years now. So I get to finally go do it.
Will you go to Portugal to learn from that teacher?
I mean, it's not on the agenda, but maybe in the future. Why not?
I'll go with you. You mentioned a lot of your students. Okay, well, let me get back to this question. How do you balance expectations of people working with you as you move into new things while offering your existing knowledge? That's a great question.
Oh, and in terms of like students or people in my audience, they expect one thing and then suddenly I'm moving on to something else a little bit.
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something I've always had to wrestle with, because my original list growth happened because of Notion. And so I knew that doubling down on Notion and staking a claim on that and positioning myself that way was going to allow me to grow my audience. But then I have to be sprinkling these other ideas that are what's informing my choices within Notion, what's informing the way that I approach Notion. I have to talk about those things too. And so you sort of start to tease those ideas, and over time, people drop off and the right people stick with you. And there's lots of people on my list that have been on my list probably since 2014. They're not interested in Notion, but they like watching the journey, or they're learning something from what I'm thinking about beyond just Notion. So I guess I'm just not too attached to kind of keeping the same people in the same audience. It's like, I'm going to grow, and some people are going to grow with me, and that's okay.
Some are.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, and how do you know when it's time to move on? So I wonder if that's how do you know when it's time to move on from this, maybe this area of exploration, and now you're on to the next?
I think when you start to feel resentful, when you start to feel more tension than joy, and that can be tough too, because I think there's always going to be tension in what we're doing, and like what's good tension and what's bad tension, what's keeping us small. So the resentment factor, I think, is like when you find yourself resenting how you're spending your time, you're not excited to get out of bed. There's just a change in energy.
It's amazing how often that resentment has come up as as like kind of a
An
litmus
indicator.
test for
Yeah.
having gone maybe a little bit too far. And I don't mean that from like a gaslighty perspective, but I mean, we have to have some kind of like some sort of internal signal that tells us, yeah, too far, let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Which comes back to looking at our patterns, which comes back to looking at those conditions that make us thrive. So how do you sort of stop that a little bit sooner? Will only come through that period of observation, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah, that is just so fantastic. Who do you see as a maven? Who else do you see as a maven?
Oh, there's so many. How do I choose?
There are no wrong
Like
answers.
Layla Ajarlu from the Unschools, total badass maven. Joanna Wiebe, fellow copywriter, total maven.
I love that, fellow copywriter. Like all of the things I go to for, I forget this, like another area of your apps, like that's the origin story of your absolute brilliance. I forget about that. Joanna Wiebe, I forgot about that too. How did you decide that Notion would be your niche out of all your interests?
There was so much magnetism around it. Like everything I was sharing at the time, people were like, oh my gosh, what is this? How do you do this? It felt like the market was absolutely pulling me in a way that I had never experienced with any other work that I put out there. So I was like, okay, there's a hunger, there's a demand. And when you get enough people saying, if you make this, like, take my money. And I never really had, people be so literal, like, if you make a course, seriously, I'll pay you for it right now. And I was like, okay, well, this is fun. It's a chance to kind of explore. It's a chance to connect my user experience background, design background, systems thinking, and practicing teaching, facilitating, connecting with people. It seemed to check all of the boxes. I could tell that we were sort of on the cusp of something that was about to get really big. And a few mastermind groups that I was in, like I had Joel in my group, he was like, you need to make a YouTube channel about this. Like he pushed me, and I was like, oh. But as soon as I did, like, that magnetism was so obvious right from the get-go. And I did an experiment in the first, I think I'd made maybe 8 to 10 YouTube videos at the time. And then I put out a sales page saying, hey, if I'm going to make a course on this, are you interested? Pre-purchase here. And I made $10,000 in a week. And that was like the easiest $10,000 I'd ever made in my life. I was like, could I have fun and make money? And like, let's try it. Worst case scenario, it's a chapter of my life, and I get to utilize my current skills and meet some amazing people, and let's see where this goes. So
there's something about, and this was after you had done your experiment with YouTube, right?
It was like I think I started in August, September, and I launched the course end of October, early November.
I think that that's part of the thing that I would love for folks who are here with us live and can be listening to the recording, just like trust your or get curious about your interests, and just just pursue it. Because I mean, if YouTube wasn't on your radar, if you hadn't allowed yourself to start to explore it, that wouldn't have come up. And gosh, we would be where would we be without you as hosting Notion Mastery, and whatever's next, because we're all going to get to learn through you. Marie, you are magnificent. You're a magnificent Maven. I adore you. I adore time with you. I'm so grateful. Is there anything you want to leave our folks with today?
Yeah, I guess just that encouragement to be willing to experiment a little bit, right? Like find what feels good for you. It can look very different for different people, and success looks different for different people. So, yeah, experimentation has never led me astray.
True enough.
Yeah.
Thank you for your generosity of sharing all your processes, all of your learnings, other folks, connecting good people to good people, ideas to
Yeah.
people, all of it. Just you're everything right with the world. They tell you.
Thank you so
More
much for having
people.
me.
Yeah, my joy. Thanks everybody for being here. We will of course link to all of Marie's goodness. Just really, really grateful for this time. Join us tomorrow when we'll speak with Steph Cowling Rich about the Sage identity and Trisha Belender about the CEO identity. Bye for now.